is going to be affected by that. I mean, I don't think anybody thinks that the way it might have gone had we not become an intelligent species is the way it's going to go. I mean, we are going to, seize the controls of our own evolution. So whatever we evolve into, it will be something, it will be an artifact that we create. We now actively participate in the process. All bets are off.
Can we...
Natural selection and all that.
Right. Do you think we can attribute everything to the psychedelics? I mean, is the psychedelics the voice of nature, or is it an alien consciousness that have entered our mind and kind of taken over at this point? What do you think about that, Dennis?
Well, that's a question, and I don't really think there's a clear answer. I think that, the psychedelics appear to be, and sometimes they present as something that is not part of the self. Sometimes they represent themselves as the voice of nature or something from nature. They seem alien in some ways. The ideas seem alien. Are they really alien? It's hard to say, because you can always say, well, this has got to be part of the self, right? Some part of the self that is split off and is presenting itself back to you, the observer, the reflector, as autonomous and not necessarily even human, some aspect of the unconscious. In some ways, I don't really think it even matters, I mean, it's sort of the old, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it may as well be a duck, and whether it's part of our mind, part of some intelligent facet of nature, part of Gaia mind, if you will, or something from another dimension or another part of the galaxy, the message seems to be more important than where it actually came from. The message is the thing that is sort of stimulating us toward ever more novelty. And I don't say it's entirely triggered by psychedelics. I think that psychedelics, the important role perhaps of psychedelics, I can't say. I mean, they're still important. People are still learning from this.
But it might have been the initial lightning bolt to get some of the ideas flowing, maybe, in humanity's past.
10,000 years ago may have been where psychedelics had their most impact, because, if you look at the historical and archaeological records and so on, you can tell from iconography and, paintings, carvings, and that sort of thing, there was a point sometime between 20,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago when this technology of using psychedelics just exploded across the planet, and new plants were discovered and brought into it. I mean, it may have started with mushrooms. There's no way to know. I think that mushrooms are the most likely because they're widespread and they don't really require any technology to prepare or consume. You just consume them. Other psychedelics require a lot more sophistication to prepare them. But somehow this technology was acquired by some groups, and then it propagated very quickly all over the world. If you look at the iconography, and every culture seems to have its own, particular teacher plants, if you will, or the ones that they were preoccupied with. In Central America, you've got mushrooms. In South America, you've got ayahuasca and the hallucinogenic snuffs and San Pedro cactus. And all of these are sort of regionally specific, medicines that were used by different groups in the region. So in some sense, I think that this knowledge, once discovered, passes from culture to culture and region to region rather quickly.
It almost seems sometimes that it's springing up on multiple places around the globe at the same time, if we look at the way language is developed and so forth. So from my point of view, it's almost like, again, we have this division. Does that mean that these kinds of plants weren't there before, or is it simply that we didn't, know about them, so we didn't utilize them, we didn't eat them or whatever?
Well, they were definitely there before. There's no reason to think that they suddenly appeared in the ecosystem, but there was a explosion of curiosity, I guess you could call it, and experimentation. It wasn't that the plants weren't there. It was that nobody was focusing on them. And, when initial discoveries were made, whether people accidentally encountered them, I mean, it's most likely they accidentally encountered something, but then that sparked curiosity, and people began to, sort of investigate their environment in search of these kinds of plants, and the same kind of thing goes on very much today. It's essentially a scientific process, it's sparked by curiosity. One of the common things that's trotted out about ayahuasca is, how did people discover that out of all the species in the Amazon, 80,000 or more species, just the combination of these two plants results in a very powerful psychedelic. And if you consume either one by itself, they don't amount to much, So,
by the way, speaking of that, Dennis, we had Jeremy Narby with us, who I'm sure obviously you're familiar with, and he mentioned that his idea here, what he heard from the anthropological work that he did, was that the people first ingested datura, another hallucinogenic substance, which kind of told them basically about how to mix these other brews, and that's pretty interesting. That opens up quite a few doors, if you will.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Why does he say datura specifically? Did he explain that?
No, he mentioned that it was that was one of this, I guess, plants or it's a berry, I guess, that you can ingest that gives you a hallucinogenic effect, if you will, right away. But the consequent contact that was made through that gave the locals there an idea, because they were in communication with something, that told them about how to make the ayahuasca brew, basically.
Yeah. I think that's entirely possible, because datura and these nightshades are one of the plants that you can get a strong effect from with basically no preparation. You can simply eat the seeds or eat the berries and you'll get a strong effect. The trick with those is that they're toxic. So it's easy to eat too much.
That's right.
But if you hit the sweet spot, you can get a very strong effect. Interestingly enough, those are not true psychedelics. The effects of those are more like deliriance, and they don't really have a psychedelic effect the same as, say, ayahuasca or mushrooms. Having said that, I sometimes tell my students they are not true psychedelics, but they are true hallucinogens. And I make a distinction. Most psychedelics don't really cause what psychologists call hallucinations, which is seeing something that is not there, that you can't tell whether it's there or not. And you may see things on psychedelics that aren't there, but you usually know that they're not there. With datura and the other nightshades, you may see things that you have no idea if they're there or not. In fact, you're totally convinced they are there, like another person, for example. It's very common to see another person who may tell you things, like things about yourself or things about how to prepare medicines. I mean, it's entirely possible. If you look at indigenous worldviews, there's usually a world of spirits and non-corporeal entities, what we might call ghosts and things like that. These are part of the reality for indigenous peoples. And, you can say, well, how can they believe such obvious poppycock? There aren't those such things. I would urge the skeptics to go into the forest one night and eat a sufficient dose of datura. they will be convinced that they live in a world of spirits and non-human entities, because they will see them. I mean, they may, after the experience, they may go back to their Western rationalism and say, well, I took a drug and it did this. But on the experiential level, they will definitely see those things and communicate with those kinds of entities. So Jeremy may be on the right track here.
Does it ultimately matter, do you think, if these things, the spirits, the things people see, if they are out there, really, in a sense, or if they're internal? I mean, if you ask somebody like, Michael Persinger with his God helmet theory and all that as well, he would say that, no, this is just internal stuff that is triggered by misfirings in the brain, and it's all internally created, basically, in that sense. But from my point of view, that doesn't really matter. But what's your comment on that, Dennis?
Well, I think, I kind of think it doesn't really matter, and I think that the distinction between external and internal is a false duality, in some ways, because if you think about it, everything is internal. We live inside a hallucination, right, that our brains create in order for us to be able to exist. I mean, everything that comes to us from the outside comes through that sensory neural filter known as our senses, which have a lot to do with keeping information out as much as it does admitting information. And the information that it lets in is then processed by our brains, by other elements of our brain, which take this raw data and turn it into essentially a story or a movie or a hallucination, which we call the consensus reality hallucination. Or sometimes I call it the serotonin hallucination, but there's, obviously a lot more than serotonin going on. So if you think about it, we live in a world that we create. We're always like in a dream, and the world, the external world, physics tells us, we know enough about physics to know that it doesn't really resemble the world that we experience at all. That's a fiction that we construct in order to make it convenient, to navigate through this world. And it corresponds to reality close enough that we don't, as a rule, step in front of buses or go walking off cliffs and things like that. So it has survival value. And it's really, everything comes from inside, or everything comes through those filters. Even the measurements that we make with our most objective scientific instruments ultimately have to be interpreted by someone.
Yeah.
So, this is the question.
We're trapped in that, if you will, in one sense.
We're really trapped in that. Yeah. I mean, it's the old, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it conundrum, or some of the current, wilder views of quantum mechanics. There is no reality without an observer to constellate, to collapse the wave function. And it may be that is the way it is, Having said that, I also think that, I really think that neuroscience, as it exists now, is not really able to say whether, consciousness, whatever that may be, is something that is generated by the brain, or whether it's a property of the continuum. And the brain is more like a detector of consciousness, much in the way a radio is a detector of radio waves, and you change the channels and you get different programs coming in. It may be that's what consciousness is. The brain can tune to different wavelengths and get different information impinging. And the psychedelics in that context become something that lets you tune into some channels that are normally blocked.
That's right.
Could
AI help us out of this trap, if we can put it that way, as in a kind of a truly objective observer of reality, do you think?
An objective